Your former Liberal colleague, Ken Wyatt, the first Indigenous Australian to be elevated to the Indigenous Australians portfolio. He's just heard the news. He's deeply disappointed. He wanted Indigenous Australians to have a voice to the Parliament. How do you look Ken Wyatt in the eye and explain why you're not hearing his voice and those of others who have seen this as the only way forward?
Well, I have the greatest respect for Ken Wyatt. I've listened to his voice. I've listened to Karen Little. I've listened to many Indigenous leaders for whom I have a great deal of respect otherwise. They have a contrary view to Ken's view. And we live in a democracy where we can consider the views of Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. And my responsibility as the leader of the Liberal Party is to act in our country's best interests. And I don't believe a voice that's enshrined in the Constitution, as the Prime Minister is proposing, against the advice of the Solicitor General and the Attorney General. It ends up being litigated in the High Court for years to come. It goes into every aspect of government consideration and decision-making. That's the advice of Marcia Langton. And they're very clear that it's that way by design. This is not just confined to elements that affect Indigenous Australians. As Marcia Langton pointed out on the weekend, we are talking about the voice being able to have a say to the RBA, to the Governor-General, to many other elements. Our proposal is to have a local and regional voice, to listen to those local elders who live in the community and to listen to what is going to make a practical outcome in terms of maternal health, in terms of a restoration of law and order, a reduction in domestic violence. They are the basics that we haven't got right. And despite the fact that we spend billions of dollars, I've been a proud member of this parliament, like Susan, for 2 decades. I have not been a part of a discussion, and I've not seen any evidence of any discussion that the Labor Party's conducted over that period of any bad intent in relation to resolving these issues of closing the gap, but it hasn't worked. And creating another national body out of Canberra, as the Prime Minister is proposing, divides our country. It doesn't unite. And it's not going to deliver the outcomes on the ground. So I just put this proposition to you. I mean, nobody's canvassed this yet. If there is overreach in what the Prime Minister is proposing in his wording, if it does go too far and the High Court interpretation is more liberal, as the Solicitor General and the Attorney General have advised, what happens then? You can't out-legislate that. So does the Prime Minister then go back to the Australian people to seek to narrow the words, which wouldn't be good for reconciliation? And that is a very real prospect. If they overreach now and they need to confine and tighten the words again of the Constitution, because it does grind government down to a near halt, then I think that is not in our country's best interest. And it's why there needs to be questions that are answered. You're putting reasonable questions, as we are. I think tone is incredibly important in this debate. I will not tolerate from any of my members or any of the public debate any comments that are derogatory towards Indigenous Australians or anybody who is advocating a yes position. This needs to be a respectful debate, and I've treated the Prime Minister with respect during the course of my engagement with him and my public commentary and our questions in the Parliament. And there are reasonable questions when the Prime Minister is proposing the biggest change to the Constitution since Federation, and it is right that the questions be answered. Bob Hawke would answer those questions. Paul Keating would answer those questions. John Howard would answer those questions. And Anthony Albanese is refusing to answer those questions. So we'll come through.
You have just said that the Prime Minister is ignoring the Karma Langton report and that co-design process by not committing to regional and local voices. Aren't you doing the same thing by not committing to a national voice? That report was very clear that the two layers needed to work together.
Well, my priority is for the local and regional voice. The Prime Minister has been very clear that he says no to a local and regional voice. And he continues to say no to constitutional recognition. He's made it clear that if the question he's proposing in October of this year doesn't get up, that he won't entertain constitutional recognition and that he won't legislate for a voice. We've been clear that we don't support his Canberra voice. It's divisive and it's not going to deliver the outcomes to people on the ground. Our proposal is a local and regional voice so that we can listen to those women and listen to those elders on the ground and get a better outcome. Yeah.